Hi, this is Trevor. It's been a while since my last video blogging, or vlogging as it's called. I think the one I did back in probably late June, early July was talking about some of the transitions and changes that have gone on in terms of my work and in terms of my home. And right now I'm messaging you or vlogging from my new apartment, and things have settled in pretty well. I'm enjoying being a little more central. I do miss where I was. That was a great association, and I greatly appreciate how at my previous location they're letting people know how to find me. And there's information attached at the bottom of this blog. You'll see I always kind of put my contact information in terms of my website, etc. Little something that I thought I would share about today. You know, working with tarot, all readers have their own particular kind of quirks, our own way of working, and there's some things that are traditional, and then there's some things that we kind of evolve in our own practice. I've been working with tarot now for over 30 years, and I have my own way of handling my cards. Sometimes when I'm with friends and we're playing cribbage or in the occasional game of poker, they get a little frustrated with me because I'm just not good at handling playing cards like playing cards. I've gotten so used to handling tarot cards. And part of what is usually the process of doing a reading for people is having them shuffle the cards. And I used to just let people handle the cards whichever way was comfortable for them. But I'm getting a little more set in my ways with time. And I'm finding more and more that I really don't like rifling. Right? Sometimes it's called riffling, and to me that's something that's just associated more with games of chance. To me it just sort of suggests not a lot of contact with the cards. You know, I think that shuffling is kind of a mindful process. I usually tell people to shuffle the cards and to think about the questions that are important in their life. Or more often I say, just as if a really good friend was to say to you, how are you doing? Let that run through your mind. And when you're shuffling the cards, I always ask them, keep them over the table. Now, part of the reason for that, it's always good to know that you're playing with a full deck. And I don't like any of the cards dropping or landing on the floor. There used to be a funny little tradition that said, what falls to the floor comes to your door. And that's, I remember my auntie saying that, you know, if somebody dropped some cutlery and a knife was a man coming to the door, I think a spoon was a woman. I'm not sure what a fork would have been. But at any rate, I like to know that we're working with the entire deck. So I don't like the cards going off the table. I like to have them over the table. And as I was saying, I really don't care for riffling or rifling. One thing about it is that it does actually turn half the deck upside down. When you are shuffling and you go like that, half the deck gets turned upside down. Now, I don't tend to necessarily pay a lot of attention to reversals. I tend to look more at card combinations, and I get a feeling with the cards, because I'm an intuitive reader, about whether a card is more pronounced or more subtle, whether it's more positively or negatively aspected. But a nice alternative to rifling, a nice thing that I actually do quite often while I'm reading, is what I call twisting. So actually, as I'm doing this, the cards are getting turned. Right? You'll also find that this puts less wear and tear on the deck. I think that cards should be treated respectfully. I'm not superstitious about my tarot cards, but much the same as working with books or any kind of printed matter, you don't like getting that unnecessarily worn down. And in the mindfulness of shuffling, I like to think of it as handling your life. Some of my clients like to do what's called the poke. Okay? And this is something I've noticed that some of my customers from different parts of the world do. Some people refer to this as Chinese shuffling, right? There's also the people that like to just simply rearrange and sort of stack the cards and let them fall. I like to make sure that the cards are being handled gently because, again, this is your life that you're handling. I'm generally one of these people, right? But what about people that are having maybe a problem because of a physical limitation? Well, that's what I call mushing, right? And mushing is a great way of having contact with all of the cards, right? So mushing is good. Mush them around on the table. And incidentally, there's been situations, particularly when I was reading in restaurants, where I had to get a deck into active shape and get it up and going fairly quickly. So one of the things that I would often do, just in terms of warming up a deck, is just some random mixing. Right? So your cards are your cards. You can have fun with them. There are some traditions that say you should keep your cards wrapped in silk and place them in a cedar box. I've done that, and I found out that part of that really had to do with something not so arcane. Remember that it's only been in the last few hundred years that people would actually own printed material. You would have been pretty rich or pretty well off if you had a library of books. And keeping books well preserved often involved keeping them wrapped in a fabric that would be resistant to forms of deterioration. And silk does that. Cedar, if you know anybody who had a granny who had a cedar chest, is a great thing to kind of keep out outside things like mites and things that would eat up that printed material. So like a lot of superstitions, these things have some grounding in actual practical application. Of course, for a lot of people, working with tarot is something that is symbolic. So when we're treating these things reverently, we're actually kind of creating that sort of mindset. When you've been a reader like myself, who's had to work in restaurants, who's occasionally had waiters or servers accidentally spill milkshakes on your cards, things like that, you kind of tend to have decks that are a little bit more in terms of practical use. And as my decks have gotten more worn over time, it's been kind of a nice tradition for me to give them away to friends. Sort of like saying, here, I want you to take a piece of me with you. Okay. So I tend to treat my cards just like I treat books, respectfully. For 17 years, my office was in a secondhand bookstore, and the owner really didn't like it if we dog-eared books. You like to kind of treat these things respectfully. So that's part of my tradition of why I'm more of a mixer and a musher and not a riffler. The other thing is that what's often traditional is that when the querent, the person who's having the reading, is finished shuffling, we have them cut the cards with their left hand. Generally, it's traditional to say 3 piles with the left hand. Why the left hand? Well, many people believe that the left hand is closer to the heart, that it is kind of connected in some way more to that aspect that tells the truth. But something I learned long ago when I was working with some old school readers, much the same as in tea leaf reading, when they'd have you place your left hand on top of the cup, the reader would be looking to see if you were wearing a wedding ring. Sort of a little bit of what I call the burlesque style of reading. I oftentimes have people cut with the left hand because it's traditional, but I don't pay a lot of attention to whether people are wearing wedding rings or not. Part of that is because I remember as a very young lad going and having time with my aunts and my mom where they'd get their tea leaves read. And some of the most challenging customers in the world are in my own family. I can remember my aunts taking their wedding rings off or having my cousins wear the wedding ring. All things kind of designed to sort of test and try the reader. So I take that with a grain of salt. I know a number of people who are in deeply committed relationships that don't necessarily wear jewelry, and I know people who wear that jewelry maybe signifying something else. So that kind of trick isn't something that really has practical application any longer, and it never really did for me anyway. So I like to observe some of these traditions. I like to take the superstitions involved with them with a grain of salt, because they oftentimes have that kind of practical or slightly more, should we say, carnival aspect to them. All part of the rich tradition of tarot that has a lot of different meaning to different people. So it's been fun mixing it up with you, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day. From my lovely new home, I want to wish everybody a beautiful autumn. Thanks.